Imagine if you could change a complete stranger's life just like that. To do it, though, you'd have to give away some of your money every year. What if over time it cost you half your wealth? Would you do it? I'm Mike Walter in Los Angeles. Let's take it full frame. Bill Gates, most of us know him as the tech mogul behind Microsoft and as the world's richest man. But now he's known for something else. These days, Bill Gates is busy eradicating poverty and disease worldwide.
He does it in big ways and small ways.
Make a little more.
A bicycle project in Seattle, empowering disadvantaged youth to lead productive lives.
My first bike, it was a little pink one with training wheels.
A first bike, an early ticket to exploring the world.
My first bike, I think I was maybe 5 years old. My grandpa bought it for me at Walmart.
But when you're young, finding your way is never easy, even when you grow up to be the world's biggest philanthropist.
Gates was, by all accounts, a very difficult young person.
Bill Gates was born in 1955, the son of William Sr. and Mary Gates.
He would argue with his parents and challenge them.
At 12, his parents sent him to an expensive private school. There he met Paul Allen, a friendship that led to a partnership that changed the world as we know it. In 1973, Gates left Seattle for Harvard, where at age 20 he started writing software for the Altair computer. Magazine editor Leslie Helm has covered Bill Gates and Microsoft for 31 years. Even as a college student, he says, Gates already meant business.
He didn't care that much how much they were paying him. What he really wanted was the ownership of the software.
In the early days of the personal computer, that ownership meant the ability to license the software. For Bill Gates, it was a license to make money. He dropped out of Harvard. By 1978, his company, now called Microsoft, would exceed $1 million in year-end sales. In 1981, a software licensing deal with computer giant IBM led to visions of industry dominance.
Very early on, he was thinking, I want to put a computer in every room, in every house.
Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen left the company in 1983. By the end of that decade, Gates had become the world's youngest billionaire at 31 and met the woman who he'd marry.
I think what really struck me was his energy and his passion. No matter what topic somebody brought up at the table, Bill was going to be excited about it and was going to bring energy to that conversation, and that was just a lot of fun.
Bill and Melinda were married in 1994. By 1995, Microsoft's Windows operating system dominated the PC industry. As Microsoft achieved world dominance, Bill Gates began to look around for something more. In 1997, Bill and Melinda Gates read an article about diseases that killed millions of children around the world, diseases that had long been eradicated in the United States. They passed that article along to Bill Gates Sr. with a note that said, "Dad, maybe we can do something about this." And before long, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was established.
This foundation is built on the view that every person deserves the opportunity for a healthy and productive life.
In 2006, fellow philanthropist and billionaire Warren Buffett pledged more than $30 billion to the foundation. The list of initiatives the foundation now funds seems endless, along with the scope of its work. Starting in 2010, the Gates Foundation pledged $10 billion to deliver vaccines over a decade to the world's poorest countries.
We know 6 million children are alive because of those vaccines.
But the foundation's work has sometimes caused controversy. Religious groups have pushed back against efforts to make contraceptives more readily available to women in developing countries.
And for them, they will tell you, this is a life and death emergency for me. If I have another child, I can't feed another child. How can I possibly have another one?
Regardless of the cause or the controversy surrounding it, when the Gates Foundation gets involved, it really gets involved.
One of the key things at the foundation that we've learned is really tough is that you can't just make a single intervention and get success.
Take agriculture. The Foundation's projects help farmers develop better soil, find access to clean water, plant better seeds, but also take their crops to market and help change policy.
And so once you put all those together, then suddenly you're getting transformative change at scale, and that's really what the foundation is all about.
In Gates' hometown in Seattle, another project is seeing transformative change, one young person at a time. Bikeworks is a small spoke in the Gates Foundation wheel. It educates youth by promoting bicycling and bicycle repair.
Bikeworks is an awesome organization that teaches kids how to fix bikes, and then kids can earn their own bike.
Daniel Gonzalez first walked into the bike shop when he was just 9 years old.
I think Bikeworks is just kind of like another parent to me sometimes.
His father walked out on the family when Daniel could barely stand up. He was just 3 years old. Today, Daniel, a junior in high school, does not dwell on the past. He's too busy working to build his future.
Well, my biggest goal after high school is to be able to get into college for mechanical engineering.
A goal that started with hands-on training inside this shop, where pay it forward isn't just a saying. After all their hard work, these kids say goodbye to their bicycles. They are sold to raise money for Bikeworks.
I just like that feeling when I'm finished and seeing how everything works after I put it all together. Even if somebody else rides off in it, you always know, oh, well, I helped put that together.
Philanthropy on the smallest scale. Small ways or large. For Bill and Melinda Gates, it doesn't seem to matter whether changing the world on any scale costs them their fortune.
Each year, Bill and Melinda Gates release a letter to the world where they discuss different aspects of philanthropy. They also chart the progress being made in making the world a better place for all of humanity. In this year's letter, they take on 3 development myths. Why? Because they say these myths are undermining efforts to save lives and cut poverty. I sat down with Bill Gates to talk about that. I also got his thoughts on all of his philanthropic causes, efforts that are now his full-time focus since he stepped down from the helm at Microsoft in 2008. Mr. Gates, in your annual letter, you addressed 3 myths, and one of the ones that I found the most interesting was taking on terms. You say that these terms, developing countries and developed countries, they've outlived their usefulness. So how would you describe things?
Well, I think the World Bank categorization, where you have low income, middle income, high income, probably captures it best. And even there, you'll have some countries that have a lot of oil revenue that's not benefiting the people all that well. So that's still not a perfect classification system. And there's so many in middle income, you might even want to break that down. India's just moved up to the low end of middle income. And you have other people like China, Brazil, who are at the upper edge there. But GDP per person captures it better than a simple adjective. The word developing would now include China and the Democratic Republic of Congo in the same categorization, and that can't be right. You go to one, you go to the other. It's not the same world.
Right, right. Well, let me ask you about corruption is another thing that you bring up, and I thought your analysis of that and looking at corruption, perhaps in Africa, but then comparing it to the U.S. state of Illinois, I thought that was an apt comparison, and I think people do tend to look at things through a different prism, don't they? Here in the West, they look at it one way, but oh, geez, our international aid, what a waste of money. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think it's partly because people worry that in some cases you have extreme corruption where all the money or half the money doesn't get to the intended recipients. And my message, my good news to people is that the aid programs now, that they're really intended to actually be aid programs. Historically, a lot of them were Cold War politics, you know, saying, okay, we want Mobutu, who ran Zaire, to be our friend. We called it aid, but that was just a euphemism. It was buying his loyalty. And so the fact that nothing magical happened for the citizens of that country, it's really no surprise. It wasn't conditioned on that. It wasn't managed in that way. Now that we're out of most of that, the aid really is being given and looking at, will this new vaccine save enough lives? Will it get out to all the kids here? And if not, you either go and fix it or you spend the money on something else. So aid has matured quite a lot.
And so there can't be, in your role, there can't be a great distance. I mean, I know you travel there quite a bit. I mean, you want your eyes there to say, okay, this really is working. That's a big part of it?
Yeah, and we have ambitious goals. Together with our partners, we want to take the number of children who die before the age of 5, which is 5% now. We want to bring that down to 1.6%. It was more than double, so we've cut it in half. Fastest reduction ever. We've got new vaccines coming along that will help us get that reduction, but it's quite an ambitious goal. So I want to go and see if countries getting ahead of the goal. What are the best practices there? If a country like Northern Nigeria is falling way behind, why aren't the workers showing up? Why isn't the supply chain working? Why aren't the mothers showing up? How is it broken down, this basic primary health care system? And then we'll redirect our money and build better systems to bring the laggards up to the best practices.
You said ambitious goals, which may be the greatest understatement ever. You have like John F. Kennedy goals. I mean, it's like he says, we're going to put a man on the moon, and people sit there and go, oh my God. I'm wondering how you got there, because as a young kid, I've seen these pictures of you when you first started. You couldn't have said, oh, I'm going to be one of the richest guys in the world. I'm going to create this unbelievable corporation that's going to change everybody. And then I'm going to, after that, and I retire, I'm going to have this foundation that's just going to do all these great things. I mean, it can't start there. So give me the trajectory. How did you get to be who you are in that regard? Ambitious goals.
Well, I was very lucky. I went to a great school. My parents talked a lot about the world. My dad was a lawyer. My mom was involved in local philanthropy. They shared what they'd learned and how they organized things. The school was top notch. Teachers, got a kick out of the questions I asked and would challenge me. I have a habit of reading a lot, which I think is worthwhile. And computers came along. So I was one of the most avid at figuring out, okay, what is software? What can it do? Why are computers so expensive? And then the computer miracle, the microprocessor, gave us a new type of computer, the personal computer. And I created the first company that was writing software for those. We built a whole industry of companies writing software. The personal computer became this incredible tool. We connected them together. We got the internet. We got smaller devices, phones and tablets. And so the information revolution, I got to participate in that. My company, Microsoft, was one of the first movers.
I've heard of it.
Office, Windows, all those things. And so my ownership stake in Microsoft, to my surprise, became worth a huge amount of money. And once you decide that giving your children huge amounts of money is not great for them or society, then you think, okay, what are the philanthropic causes? What are the great injustices in the world? And can giving at a philanthropic level that's still very small compared to governmental level, can it be so catalytic? The same type of spirit of backing great scientists, thinking long term, being willing to make mistakes. A lot of what I learned at Microsoft is very applicable to this new area.
You talk about goals, but you also are really good at predictions. By 2035, there will be almost no poor countries left in the world. People have been going at this for a long time, a lot of bright people. What makes you so optimistic that, that this will get licked?
Well, we start several hundred years ago where everybody was poor. And at first, a small part of the world got rich. And in 1960, you could see there was a bulge of people in the rich world, and then the rest was poor, and not much in between. Now, since then, the good practices that brought the rich world up, education, infrastructure, seeds, medicine, stability, those have been adopted by lots of places. China, Mexico, Brazil, they're sort of exemplars because they were as poor as any country. China actually poorer than most, and yet by applying the latest industrial approaches, science, market-based pricing, what's happened is incredible there. So the question is, why should there be any country that doesn't participate? Yes, it's tough if you have a war. You've got to get stability. If you're a landlocked country in Africa, you've got malaria, parasitic diseases, tough geography. So they may lag. But my belief is that we'll have maybe less than 10 countries that are low income by that time. And of course, that means the donors can really focus in on the very toughest cases. And the line of progress, along with some innovation, suggests that it's not a crazy goal.
Writer David Lamb wrote for the LA Times as a bureau chief in Africa and wrote this book, The Africans, in 1983. And I went to Somalia in 93, and I read it, and one line from that book stays with you when you go in there. And the line was, in Africa, hope is an island in a sea of misery. And I saw the orphanages, and I saw the hospitals, and I saw the mass graves, and I know you've gone all over the continent. What haunts you about what you've seen? What drives you? What fuels this whole drive of yours to, bring prosperousness to these people?
When you have a statistic like 1 million kids died of malaria, it's almost less evocative than, if I showed you the picture of one kid and I handed it to you. And in fact, by going to Africa, you go into a ward and you'll see lots of kids there got cerebral malaria. Many of them, when you come back 24 hours later, have died. And yet we have, if we'd gotten to those kids early enough, if they'd used bed nets, if they'd had the medicines, they should survive. And the effect on diseases like that on how people's brains develop, how they develop physically, it really holds countries almost in a poverty trap. And so I think your dedication to these causes is always renewed when you go in and see it at the individual level. You meet a mom, whose kid is in that hospital, hoping that their child will survive. Now you still have to look at the statistics because that gives you that broad picture. Nobody can go and visit the millions and add that up. And so the on the ground work, the scientific work, really the measurement things, all those come together to say that, wow, why isn't this being done? Why haven't we focused in on it? Why, was there nobody really funding malaria vaccine work before we came along?
There's been a lot of talk about the 1%, and I saw one story about you where they characterized you as only being concerned about the bottom 2 billion, which I thought was a nice way to characterize what you're up to. You and Warren Buffett have made a lot out of this giving pledge, but there's been some pushback. Did that surprise you?
Well, the Giving Pledge, which is people with substantial wealth agreeing to give over half of it and then getting together to share lessons of what's worked, mistakes. If they have common causes, they can work together, but we're not pooling money and endorsing anyone's causes over anyone else's. It's been amazing. We thought we'd get maybe 15 or 20 people. Now we're 122 people, 105 from the United States. We have a yearly get-together. It's very rich. I learn a lot every time I go. So I think it's going to get people to get involved younger when they can contribute more. I think it'll get them to be more generous. I'm certainly willing to share how much fun I'm having, and that it's not a dead end. There are causes out there that you can feel a pretty unique ownership of the wonderful things that you enable.
One final question, because we're just about out of times. But I said times, I meant time. The Economic Times, though, published the results of an international poll last week that listed you as the most admired person on the planet. And on the way over here, the cab driver, who's from India, I told him I was going to be interviewing you, and he said, I wish I could come up and meet him and just shake his hand and say thank you. I'm from India. For all the poor people, I'd like to say thank you to him. And he said, you know, when people die, they can't go to heaven with all that money, but they can go to heaven with all those good deeds. You tell him he's going to heaven. Mike says so. I know that you probably hear stuff like this, and to see a poll like that has to make you feel good. But what about that? What does it say when people say something like that? I mean, you know, here you are, a guy who could have done a million things after you retired, and to be cast in that light by a guy who's driving the streets of New York on this day, which isn't very easy. How's it make you feel?
Well, it's nice that you know, I'm getting more credit than I deserve in something like that. You know, there were an amazing number of people at Microsoft who did great work. You know, the resources of the foundation, Warren Buffett, you know, half of what we have comes from him. You know, the people who devote their lives to working in the field in Africa are giving up stuff. You know, I'm not giving up things. I, you know, get to buy all the books and, you know, do wonderful things. So real charity are those people who give up, you know, part of their lives or give money that they would spend, you know, to have a nicer vacation. If my example encourages people to be entrepreneurs, if it encourages them to be philanthropists, then you know, certainly I feel good about that. I was surprised at the poll. A little bit, the American dream is very popular in India and China. You know, so even in my Microsoft days, the visibility and the, you know, the positive energy there was strong. And it's nice to see, you know, philanthropies at an earlier stage in those countries. When I'm over in both of them, I get to talk with some of the people starting in philanthropy and encourage them. I think it is an important movement, just like the technology movement. It's been huge for those countries as well. You know, so I'd say I've been, you know, incredibly lucky, and I, you know, feel a sense of responsibility. And, you know, my wife and I, you know, this is what we'll be doing the rest of our lives.
Next, is science any closer to eradicating a disease that has killed millions of people every year for centuries?
Culture Express. See the world in color.
We are CCTV America.
One of the top priorities of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is to support efforts to control and eradicate malaria. The disease occurs in nearly 100 countries worldwide, impacting both the health and the economy in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. More than 200 million people suffered from the disease in 2010, leading to more than 500,000 deaths that year alone. The vast majority of malaria victims are young children under the age of 5. So the question is, what more can be done in the fight against malaria? Joining me now to discuss the latest efforts being made in the field and in the lab are Dr. Jessie Stone. She's the founder and director of Soft Power Health, an NGO dedicated to fighting malaria and based in Uganda. Also with us is Bruce Hay. He's a professor of biology at the California Institute of Technology, and his research focuses on innovative ways to eliminate mosquito-borne diseases like malaria. Welcome to Full Frame. Jessie, let me start with you because I think you've got a really unique human story about all of this. Somehow you got involved in this it was sort of serendipity, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I had no interest initially in malaria per se, but I was invited on a kayaking trip to the Nile River back in 2003. And while I was there, 2 of the people I was on this expedition with got malaria, and I had to treat them. And looking at their situation, and they had been theoretically taking prophylaxis and sleeping under mosquito nets, and they still got malaria, made me look around and say, well, what about the local people? You know, do they have malaria all the time? Do they have mosquito nets? What do they do about this problem?
And you were shocked at the answers.
I was completely shocked at the answers. I mean, we did a little survey in the village we were staying in. We went to 50 homes and interviewed 50 home residents, and they did not understand, not a single one of them understood that malaria was caused by the bite of a mosquito. And so therefore, if they didn't understand that, why would they need a mosquito net? So nobody had a mosquito net.
Bruce, we're talking about one continent, but we also talked about Asia, and I want to kind of get your own personal observations, because your wife's from China. How does that influence your work and your drive to actually make a significant dent in all of this?
Well, malaria is a worldwide problem. It's not only present in Africa, but also throughout large parts of Asia and India as well. And so it's something that we think about all the time in terms of how can we stop this problem and what can we do that is new, because as we've heard from your introduction, the problem is, despite all of the things that we normally do with drying out the environment, to remove the mosquitoes, to try and remove the mosquitoes, the drugs, the bed nets, etc., we still have this huge burden throughout the world.
Let me ask you about your work, because I think it's really interesting, and it seems like it's cutting edge, and it's approaching it from a different angle in a way, isn't it? Can you talk about it?
So our focus is the mosquito, and again, it comes from the central observation that malaria is caused by the bite of a female mosquito, picking up a blood meal from one infected person, incubating and growing those parasites for a period of days, and then transmitting it through a bite again to an uninfected person. And the fundamental cause of malaria is the fact that we have those mosquitoes and we can't get rid of them in the places where malaria is endemic. And so our work starts from the observation by others many decades ago that some mosquitoes are naturally resistant to malaria. The genes, the variants of the genes that are naturally occurring mosquito genes that encode these genes that make the mosquito resistant to Plasmodium have been cloned. And what's been found is that if you take those and you reintroduce them into a susceptible mosquito, that mosquito now is no longer able to carry Plasmodium from one person to another.
And so from a scientific standpoint, that's all fascinating, but to somebody like Jesse, who's boots on the ground, what he just said is that's hope in a way for you,
Absolutely.
right?
I mean, absolutely. I think the thing about malaria, everybody wants a simple answer. You do this, you're going to eliminate malaria. But it's an incredibly complex problem, and you have to deal with it on many fronts. The mosquito is definitely one of the fronts that you have to deal with. But you also have to deal with, for example, the reservoir for the disease, which is us humans, you know, and how can you control it in the humans as well? How can you control the environment that people live in? You know, that's when you come back to things like having people sleep under bed nets, making sure they get the proper treatment. There's also something called indoor residual spraying, which has been done in a number of places where they literally come into people's homes and spray insecticide on the walls of people's homes to eliminate the resting mosquitoes that are there to bite you at nighttime when you're sleeping.
You know what's interesting, talking to Bill Gates, you know, in that conversation, he talks about things like toilets and thermoses. You're talking about mosquitoes, working with the mosquitoes. It seems to me like we have a new generation of people attacking this problem by coming in with a different set of values or approaches. And I want to talk to you about that. Got 2 young people here who are very aggressive about this. What do you bring to the table? What do people like Bill Gates bring to the table in terms of going after malaria, and yourself as well?
Well, I mean, I think, one of the things Gates has been focused on for a very long time, and it's very ambitious, and it would be absolutely fabulous if it actually works one day, is developing a vaccine. There's been a lot of money and effort and research that's gone into that. And the vaccine that has been developed to date is not very effective. It's not something that you could ever roll out on its own. It would have to be done in conjunction with something else. We still have to focus on the most important issue in my mind, which is educating people about how they get malaria and how they can prevent it. That is something that we still take for granted and think that in many of these rural communities, in the areas, for example, where we work, that people understand how malaria is transmitted, but they don't. They don't. They do not have that information. So getting that information to people helps people help themselves.
Bruce, she's talking about vaccination. It seems like this has been something that people have been going at for a long time. Why the difficulties?
The difficulty is that Plasmodium, as a parasite, is very clever about having multiple strategies for evading the human immune system. And so what I'm sure Jesse sees all the time is that people who are continually exposed to malaria build up a low-grade immunity to it that makes them not have necessarily severe symptoms all the time, but they're always carrying the parasites. And when the parasites infect young children, of course, they don't have any immunity, and so they can get a very severe form of the disease. But the bottom line is that the parasite is very, very good at evading the immune system.
Bruce, Jesse, thank you both so much. It's been a great conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Vaccines save the lives of millions of children worldwide every year. Here in the United States, however, something unusual is happening. Some parents are having second thoughts about vaccinating their children. Is there cause for alarm? We'll explore the debate next.
Sports Scene, the heart and soul of sport.
Each year, more than 100 million children worldwide are vaccinated against nearly a dozen preventable diseases, like tuberculosis, polio, and measles. The vaccines save an estimated 2.5 million lives each year. But shockingly, 1 in 5 children around the globe do not receive any type of vaccinations. As a result, the World Health Organization estimates 1.5 million children die each year. That's one child every 20 seconds. So in other words, since I've been talking about this, another child has died. And again, all of these deaths are from vaccine-preventable diseases. Now, nearly 200 countries are endorsing a shared vision known as the Decade of Vaccines. The plan is to make vaccines available to every person on the planet by 2020. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is one of the biggest donors to this campaign. But as Full Frame contributor Nellie Sciutto found out, in the United States, Europe, and Japan, not all parents are concerned about having the right vaccines available for their children. Instead, some are debating whether to vaccinate their children at all.
The controversy began in 1998 when a British doctor, Andrew Wakefield, published a study which claimed to find a link between the mercury found in common measles, mumps and rubella vaccines, and autism. The findings alarmed many. It led some, particularly in wealthy countries, to advocate stopping the use of vaccines altogether. The Associated Press has said that immunization rates dropped sharply in the United States and in Britain. In Britain, from 92 to 73%, and were as low as 50% in some parts of London. In the US, the rate did not drop as much, but nearly 125,000 children born in the late 1990s were unvaccinated. As a result, the American CDC, or Center for Disease Control, says that more cases of measles were reported in 2008 than in any year since 1997. In 2011, the British Medical Journal, which had originally published Dr. Wakefield's study, dismissed it. The journal called it fraudulent, saying it had done great damage to public health.
In reality, I'm treating the parent more than the child.
And yet, Dr. Peter Waldstein, a well-known pediatrician in California, still sees many patients scared of vaccinating their children, fearing they will put them at risk of autism.
Okay, all done, buddy. Oh, it's okay.
I've been in private practice over 35 years. Most of my patients come from different socioeconomic regions, areas, neighborhoods. So, we try to provide them good medical care. There are patients that absolutely refuse vaccines. I make them sign a waiver.
According to the CDC, 1 in 6 children in the United States has a developmental disability. Many parents believe there is a direct link between a preservative called thimerosal in vaccinations and the increase in developmental disorders like autism.
Thimerosal is a mercury preservative that they used to put in vaccines. Today's vaccines do not contain thimerosal, aluminum, or any additives that I know that would be detrimental to a child's health.
Try. Okay, go get him.
Many researchers believe the rise in cases of autism is better explained by growing awareness and increasing acceptance.
I don't think we're seeing more cases of autism or ADHD. I think that the awareness is more evident.
Hi, Rob Schneider in The Chosen One.
Comedian Rob Schneider is a parent who takes his stance against forced vaccinations very seriously.
Unfortunately, the injuries are real. I mean, whether the government admits or says that autism is caused by vaccines or not, the fact is, the matter is that vaccines can cause brain inflammation.
Schneider says that he has not vaccinated his young child, but among entertainers, he is not alone. Jenny McCarthy, a host on a popular TV talk show, is a vocal critic of vaccines. She believes her son, Evan, developed autism because he received vaccines as an infant. Many doctors, however, see avoiding vaccines as a health hazard for children.
I personally think this is foolish, and I think that you're going to see a resurgence of different diseases like pertussis, meningitis, even polio.
The parents against vaccinations refuse to believe the rise of infectious diseases is directly linked to refusing inoculations.
For instance, in the state of Washington, 77% of the kids who came down with a whooping cough were completely vaccinated, up-to-date kids who were, who had the vaccination. So it is not a perfect science. So, people need that choice.
In the Laurel Canyon neighborhood of Los Angeles, other parents agree. Some, however, fear speaking. One mother told me she did not want to be interviewed because she feared her point of view would keep her children from being invited to their friends' homes or accepted into certain private schools. The family told me they have already faced backlash against their decision not to vaccinate. They were asked to leave their pediatrician's practice for refusing vaccines after their child had a bad reaction to one. Some doctors say unvaccinated children pose a risk to other patients. 16 years after Dr. Wakefield's study in Britain first sparked fears about the MMR vaccine, some parents still struggle for answers. The rise in diagnosed cases of autism and autism spectrum disorders defies explanation. Doctors and parents alike are demanding more research.
I don't have any link between autism and vaccines because I mean, I've been doing this for so long, I wouldn't be giving kids vaccines, that I saw a cause and effect. I have seen no, adverse reactions causing autism whatsoever from these vaccines.
My advice to the parents who are deciding to vaccinate or not to vaccinate, I would ask them to go to the National Vaccine Information Center, educate yourself, and ask your doctor questions. And I think that the parents are already asking these questions.
Joining me now to dig deeper into this debate are Dr. Jay Gordon, a pediatrician who's authored several parenting books, including Preventing Autism, What You Can Do to Protect Your Children Before and After Birth. And Barbara Dean, a women's health nurse practitioner. She's also the author of the Blue Orchid Health Guides. And I want to welcome both of you to Full Frame. Dr. Gordon, why don't I start with you? I mean, you wrote this book about preventing autism. Are these vaccines safe?
Vaccines are safe. The way that we allow them to be manufactured and giving them 6 vaccines at a time at 6 weeks of age is not the safest way to do it.
Barbara?
Well, Dr. Gordon and I are not going to agree on this, but it's really important to have this discussion, and because a lot of parents ask me the same question. There's really no evidence that spacing out vaccines makes any difference in children's health, and I'm here to tell you that vaccines save millions of lives, and it's really safe for people to get them all at the same time.
So, Dr. Gordon, obviously you're here in Los Angeles, where I think this has really got a lot of energy down here. You hear from a lot of parents who are very concerned about this. What's behind it all?
When I began in practice, the number given was 1 out of 10,000 children had autism. Now it's 1 out of 88. The original title for my book wasn't Preventing Autism. The original title was We Shouldn't Have to Protect Our Children from Their Own Pajamas. There are a lot of environmental toxins. There are flame retardants, there are pesticides, too many plastics. And the way that we give vaccines without considering family history, without considering a child's development, early development, isn't the best way to do it. Give vaccines very slowly because it's a big, big medical intervention. We could give vaccines much more safely than we do.
Barbara, what about the figures he throws out? I mean, do you think that there's some truth in it, that we're seeing more cases of autism, or perhaps we're doing a better job of gauging how much autism is out there versus the old days?
Yeah, I'm a mother and I'm a pediatric nurse. I care for children with autism. Dr. Gordon is right. There are more cases of autism, and we're still doing so much work in trying to figure out what are the causes. We know that there's a link to family history, and there's probably multiple genetic factors and environmental factors. What we know for sure, though, is that vaccines are not the cause of autism.
But this linkage, there was the Wakefield study, which was retracted by the Lancet, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, which is very respected here in the United States. You also have institutions like that overseas, also in Europe, who say there's just no linkage. Why is this continuing to kind of percolate? And I want to go to you with that.
The Wakefield study was a study done by 13 authors of 12 children. The error was made by the Lancet. The Lancet, if you have a study that has more authors than subjects, you don't give it 6 or 7 pages in the major medical journal of the Western world. You give it a letter to the editor.
But it gained this energy, this momentum. It's almost like a tsunami.
There's no question that it shouldn't have.
Well, unfortunately, Dr. Wakefield can't practice in the United Kingdom, and because of all the publicity about that, many parents in the United Kingdom and around the world decided not to vaccinate. They were afraid. And so they put their children at risk because they thought they were doing the right thing. All parents want to do the right thing for their children, but deciding not to vaccinate.
But let me just go where you're going, which is it's a crapshoot, though, isn't it? I mean, if I'm nervous about autism, but if my child might die because of one of these diseases, that's...
And Mike, you bring up an important point. It is Russian roulette. Because we know that in the United Kingdom, where vaccination rates dropped after the Wakefield fiasco, there's 1,000 to 2,000 cases of measles every year. So measles that used to be eradicated, which is a very serious infection, it's on the rise in the United Kingdom. We're seeing pertussis, the same thing, because people are not vaccinated because of fear of vaccinations, which hasn't been proven out by any data.
Well, actually, the CDC is very clear that the reason that we have increased pertussis vaccination isn't because people aren't vaccinating. I mean, you can look at the Red Book, at the CDC's data. What they say is that we have a wimpy vaccine. It wears off in 3 or 4 years. We've never eradicated whooping cough, but there is no question that if you don't get a measles vaccine, you're at much greater risk to get measles.
But let me pose this question, because we're a global network, we're seen all around the world, and as a result, there can be somebody on the African continent watching this saying, oh my God, what I would give to be able to vaccinate my child, and here are these people with enormous wealth, and they're not doing it. What would you say to them?
I would say that the efforts of Bill and Melinda Gates are fantastic. They're bringing vaccines where they're needed, and that we in America do have the luxury of knowing that we have eradicated or nearly eradicated some diseases, and that these vaccines are no longer as relevant to us, and that the risk-benefit analysis, nobody questioned the polio vaccine in America in 1960 or 1970. If someone had said there's some side effects possible, we'd have said, well, give me the shot. Now, with polio eradicated, 34 years ago, 35 years ago, we eradicated polio in the United States. We can discuss risks and benefits. I don't think that's a risky vaccine, by the way.
Barb, I want to give you a chance to respond.
Well, you know,
we're going to have to wrap it after
I'm
that.
incredulous because there were 4 new cases of polio in Pakistan. Now, we have troops, we have armed forces who grew up in this country who need to get those vaccinations, because if they encounter someone in Pakistan or in sub-Saharan Africa...
There is no question. If you're going to Pakistan, get vaccinated.
Oh, so it's okay then, what I'm hearing you say...
100%.
Oh, so are vaccinations safe then?
Vaccinations are safe. We don't give them as safely as we could. My Facebook picture is a picture of me getting a hepatitis A vaccine on my way to rural Ethiopia. That wasn't a debatable issue. But the idea of vaccinating everybody in America, every child in America at 6 weeks of age with 6 or 7 different vaccines, because you know we're adding one, that's not the best medicine. We don't give 6 of anything else. We don't give 6 antibiotics.
I'll give you the last word, but we've got to wrap up.
We are never going to agree. I'm talking about apples and oranges and saving children's lives. You're talking about boats and kneecaps here. These are completely different ideas. What I'm saying is people should not take the risks because
Boats and kneecaps?
Because if people don't get their children vaccinated, they put their children at risk.
We're going to have to leave it there. Both of you, thank you so much for coming in and joining us here on Full Frame.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Boats and kneecaps?
Have you ever wondered what doing the impossible looks like? We'll have the remarkable story of one woman doing just that. That's coming your way next.
One for all. China 24.
We are CCTV America.
Taking on the seemingly impossible is not a new experience for Minda Dentler. Last year, she took beating the odds to a new level. That's when she became the first woman to complete the Ironman World Championships in her division in Kona, Hawaii. It's a feat for any athlete to complete this grueling course, let alone an athlete who's also a survivor of polio.
One summer, I watched the New York City Triathlon, and one of my friends, who's also a wheelchair athlete, was competing in it. And I remember thinking, wow, that is so cool. I would like to do a triathlon. I was born in India, and I contracted polio probably around the age of 6 months. And polio affected me by paralyzing me from the hips down. And so my mom, who was unable to care for me, she left me at an orphanage. And luckily, 3.5 years later, I was adopted by an American family, and I moved to Spokane, Washington, where I was able to get the medical care necessary to enable me to walk with leg braces and crutches. I grew up in a very athletic family. My 3 siblings, they played many sports. I often watched them from the sidelines. I would volunteer at local road races, and I often wondered how I could get involved or what I could do to play sports. But it wasn't until I was around age 28, after I had moved to New York City, I found out about this organization called Achilles. Achilles introduces people with disabilities to athletics. I didn't make the connection that I could be that person in that wheelchair in that race that I grew up watching until I was introduced to an organization that allowed me to not only make that connection, but they also loaned me a hand cycle as my first sport to participate in races. I love living in New York City. It's a very diverse place with a lot of different people doing many different things. You can be who you want to be here. New York is a very competitive place. If you spend very much time here, like I have, you sort of get that vibe of being competitive yourself.
Hi there.
Hey, what's up?
How we doing?
Good.
You ready to ride?
Yes.
All right, let's go.
What are we doing?
Kona course today.
Okay,
Why not a little return?
let's do it.
Return to Kona.
In all honesty, the biggest challenges for doing my first triathlon was actually to learn the disciplines, because I had only known how to ride a hand cycle, and so I had to get swimming lessons to learn how to swim.
All right, Minda, here we go. Ready?
Okay. Oh my God, that's so crazy.
There we go.
Just like able-bodied athletes, wheelchair athletes have to qualify for the Ironman World Championship.
Would a smaller crank be easier?
Yes.
Or would it get
Ironman, they have either half Ironman or Ironman races that you can qualify at all over the world. And so I went to a qualifying race in Europe, and I won my division, and that gave me a slot to the Ironman World Championships in Kona, Hawaii.
I think what makes the Ironman special is the amount of training and preparation that it requires from each athlete. So it's not so much the difficulty on the day, but it's definitely what it takes to get there. It's the 10 months or the year that it takes to actually get to that start line before you even start the race that makes it really special.
I know you're nervous and stuff, but just get in that water.
In October 2012, I came to Kona and I failed. I did not make the swim bike cutoff time of 10.5 hours. That failure really motivated me to try again the following year. Actually, no woman wheelchair athlete has completed the Kona course because it's so difficult to make those time cutoffs.
You know, a big part of what Minda had to face was the clock. It's the reality that if you don't get to this point, you don't go on. And that's a whole new level of competition in this type of sport. Everybody who showed up on that island, able-bodied, knows they can finish. So that's a factor they don't even have to think about.
I am most proud of my performance in Kona in 2013. By making history and becoming the first female hand cyclist to ever complete the Kona course, it just has a special place in my heart, and it really motivates me to and shows me that anything is possible.
When you talk to Minna about how she got involved, it was the idea of like, hey, that was something that looked cool, I want to try it. And, you know, able-bodied or not, like too many people don't just go out and try them. You know, she shows that you can do it. You can try it. Sometimes you're gonna love it, sometimes you won't. Sometimes you just end up the world champion.
I think being a person with polio, having this disability, by having the success that I've had so far, that I represent what is possible. I think with hard work and dedication and with a great team of people around me, I've been able to accomplish a lot of things, and I want people to know that they could do the same. And it doesn't matter what you look like or where you came from, that you can achieve what you want to achieve by having that hard work and dedication and a great team around you. My goals for the near term are to actually go back to Kona. Because I won my division in 2013, I am able to go back and compete once again. I really want to improve my time, and I think that experience is just amazing. In terms of longer term, my goals are to advance in my career and in the financial services industry, as well as to have a family. I hope to raise my kids in a polio-free world one day.
And Bill Gates has been quoted as saying that his proudest achievement in life is the work the Gates Foundation has done to eradicate polio in India. India just celebrated 3 years without a single case of wild polio. And that's it for this week. Join the conversation with us on social media. We are CCTV America on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. All of tonight's interviews can be found online on CCTV America's YouTube page. And let us know what you'd like us to take full frame next. Email us at fullframe@cctv-america.com. Until then, I'm Mike Walter in Los Angeles. We'll see you next time.
Reaching out for news whenever and wherever it breaks.
Communities that have had to move off their land.
It will be useful. Baytran Middle School.
Updates on the hour throughout the day. The latest from our changing world.
Seeing the most perilous.
Had enough of occupation.
Tune in for CCTV News updates at the top of every hour. CCTV News, your link to the world.
Breaking news. Global trends. CCTV News brings you stories with the different aspects of Africa in the international content. With our reporters across Africa and all over the world, we'll tell you about the real Africa and how it impacts the world. Africa Live, every day, only on CCTV News.
A land full of natural resources and ingenuity, where millions are embracing a vibrant middle class, divided by politics, but united by hope. Latin America is changing rapidly. Witness the change on America's Now.
There is no more they, or you, or me. In today's economic landscape, there is only we. An interconnected world of business, trade, and investment. Daily coverage told simply, with insight and new perspectives. Biz Asia America, our world of business.